Have you ever wondered what it would look like if gym leaders would have specialized into a different typing? Today we have challenged ourselves to this exact challenge, but instead of just giving them different Pokemon, we're turning their current Pokemon into the new typing. So for this video I combined the first 4 gym leaders of Kanto, so sit back, relax and enjoy. Before we move into the Pokemon themselves, I also wanted to take a look at transforming the design of Brock himself. I did however fall back onto the photoshopping method, which of course involves some tracing elements, because I've never drawn humans before and was feeling a bit burned out on drawing as well. My goal for this drawing was to not make him look too extra and keep him close to the essence of what Brock is. Just a simple dude who loves his Pokemon, but is very serious and professional in battle with them. I made sure to grab some reference from all the already existing grass type gym leaders out there. This gave me a bunch of ideas I was able to use, which made me realize that these type of gym leaders don't necessarily scream grass or foresty elements, but mostly have a design that either show their connection with nature or just use the simple color green. Now that I knew that, I started bringing in some details like flower pots hanging on the side of his legs, the leafy scarf around his neck, the wooden belt, and I gave his shirt a pine forest look. I mostly had fun with the addition of the colors, where I just tried playing around with them until I got the look I was going for. Well everyone, meet Broccoli, the leader of the Pewter City's grass gym. Time to face him and his team. The first member of his team is a grass version of Graveler. This character wasn't that difficult to replicate since his body consists out of a single sphere and some limbs attached to it. Of course it is always difficult to actually draw hands and arms in general, but my idea for this Pokemon allowed me to be a bit rough on the design, which gave me a lot of wiggle room on that department. Once we managed to get the body onto our canvas, we moved on to the grassy elements. I started by changing his arms into wooden versions of themselves, because my goal for this piece was to make a bushy ball with wooden limbs sticking out of it. Once all of the arms were done, I moved on to his eyebrow area, where we added a few branches to give him a bit more depth and to play around with his expression. I did debate on making the legs into grassy ones, but ultimately decided to make them wooden as well. The last detail I brought onto the wooden elements were some small extrusions which gave the piece a lot more depth too. The only thing I had left to do was to add in the body shape, and with some tweaking here and there, we actually were able to make a cool looking design. I know I never talk about the line art phase, but there just isn't much to say about it without going into an in-depth tutorial. Let me know if you have any questions about them in the comments and I will respond to all of them. For the colors I make sure to color drop from already existing Pokemon, so I don't move too far away from the colors the official Pokemon company would use for their designs. We went with one shade of brown for all of the wooden elements and went with a darker shade of brown for his fingers. We then filled in the bush area with a nice green color and gave the middle area a darker variant too. This gave the Pokemon a bearded look, which I found quite amusing. Mossolder, the forest bully Pokemon. This Pokemon rests at the base of woodland trees. When they aren't sleeping, they climb up trees to then roll back down and crash into anything that gets in their path. They pick off some of the moss from their bodies and roll them into balls to throw at unsuspecting Pokemon. These behaviors have dubbed Mossolder the forest bullies. I am really happy with this design. It really captures the essence of Graveler, but also has adopted into his new typing extremely well. I did make him into a part ground type, because at first I felt like keeping the same secondary typing the regular Pokemon has, but I did change this up later in this video. The second member of Broccoli's team is a grassy Rhyhorn. I will start out by saying that I tried doing our new sketching technique at first, but I just knew that this drawing was going to take forever if I did. This is why I fell back onto our old ways, and to let out a small secret, we did it for some other of these drawings as well. I know people will always hate on me doing so, but please cut me some slack, because these designs are quite difficult to make and a big step up from simple first and even second stage pseudo legendaries. I will do my best to avoid using this technique and will continue to challenge myself to improve my drawing skills. but don't hate on me if I ever fall back onto it, please. For the design itself, we began by adding a big chunk of leaves to his head and ran it down all the way to the tip of his tail. We also added some leaves to his bottom jaw to slightly suggest a beard and overgrown aesthetic in general. This alone wouldn't be enough of a change, so I came up with the idea to use a part steel typing and gave him 2 big spikes to each side of his body. We do however change up the typing due to the use of the colors, but more on that in a second. The final details we gave him were some underbite teeth, and we added an extra nail to each of his feet. Now it is actually time to talk about the colors, and we decided to move away from the cold steel colors because this would make it look too similar to a regular Rhyhorn. We went with an earthy color palette for his body and used a sandy color for the main parts and a brown color for the spikes and teeth. The green however had to be the main focus of the design, so we went with a bright green variant to really make it stand out. I am actually a huge fan of this color palette, and it currently does look a little bit like shiny Rhyhorn, but we managed to make this shiny look absolutely different and absolutely fire. Rhythorn, the hard thorn Pokemon. This Pokemon loves to run across empty fields in large herds. However, the only thing that can stop a herd of charging Rhythorns is loads of trees to stand in their way. This completely wrecks them when one of the Rhythorns topples over, and the rest will then just follow. It isn't very intelligent either, so it can run for hours plowing down trees without even realizing the damage it's causing. It isn't necessarily the biggest change ever, but I really like the end result. Like I said about the shiny, it really does look a bit like a magma infused walking rock, and I know that might not be the best fit thematically, but come on. It looks good on another level. Up next is the third Pokemon of Broccoli's team, which is a grass form of Amistar. For this drawing we used our own sketching technique again, and we were able to quite quickly replicate the body and pose of Amistar, since it's basically a sphere for the shell and a sphere for his face, with of course the tentacles sticking out from there. The direction of the design itself was pretty clear from the start as well, because I still wanted to keep the part water typing in there. And there's one thing that instantly sells as a grass type from the ocean, which is seaweed. I decided to change all of his limbs and his body in general into this seaweed. This already helped a lot to portray both typings, but I wanted to play into a more deep sea version of Amistar. I did this by roughing up the shell into a more pointy one. I know if we're really going to talk about actual deep sea creatures, they are mostly made out of a slimy substance, so they don't collapse by the harsh pressure from the water at that depth. But let's just say this is a deep sea creature, but not a that deep sea creature. For the colors I first tried to use a green like blue for its body, but this didn't make it look enough like seaweed, so I opted into a more green variant of that hue. Algastar, the Kraken Pokemon. It is said that Algastar lurks in the depths of the ocean, only rising to the sea's surface once every so often to devour a captain and its crew who dare to venture out above its home. Algastar constricts their target and slowly consumes them through the vortex of teeth that can crush any metal known to man. At first I didn't make this Pokemon too much bigger than a regular Amistar, but after revisiting this design during editing, I figured it looked quite similar to a Kraken and used that as a reference. I didn't want to make him too big however, so I went with a scary height, but not a world-ending one. The second to last member of his team is the grass variant of Kabutops. I once again went back to my old ways for this design and started on changing his features immediately. We began by changing the side parts of his head into a grass-like fur and replaced his back spikes with something similar as well. We then changed his upper legs to resemble grass too. The next thing we did was to simplify his sides, but we did make sure to add a segment between the arm and the scythe to bring back some depth into the design. At first I wanted to go into a grass bug typing, but eventually decided to switch it up by going into a part fire typing, which is just a way cooler typing in my opinion. The moment where you can actually see that typing is once we put in the colors. I did play around with them for a while, but in the end decided to go with a lot of green together with some orange accents for his attacking parts. This is something that I already knew would work well, but this piece was a good reminder of that. Sometimes we tend to think that using only one color on the design, with different shades of course, looks aesthetically pleasing, but your design can look so much better if you just add one different complementary accent color to it. Kabutorch, the Fireblade Pokemon. Supposedly a relative of Scyther, Kabutorch scorches wildlife with its blades of fire, also causing wildfires that destroy entire ecosystems. Evidence leads scientists to believe that Kabutorch was the main cause of Genesect going extinct. It is so fun to see that even only a color palette change can already do so insanely much for a drawing. Together with some cool changes to the design itself, you can really make a good looking Pokemon. I did also bring in the more fiery colors for a shiny, and I guess it also plays into a more fall-like color palette, which is quite nice. For the ace and final Pokemon of Broccoli's team, we're taking a look at Grass type Onix. I will say that at first I didn't have a clue on what to do with this design. I thought it would have been an easy transformation, but I didn't just want to copy the same design elements I used for Graveler's new form. This made me opt into a grass turf / hedge kind of look. I managed to sort of get it to look like that by breaking up his body into two different segments, one ground one and the other one as the grass part. We did also break these two elements up with a green segment line in between them. For the most part I was debating if I wanted to add more details onto the design, like some flowers for example. I even tried to add a big one on his forehead, but that looked absolutely hideous, so I completely scrapped that feature. Now that I look back at the design, I can clearly see some perspective issues, especially with the body connecting to the head. This is still something I need to get a lot better at, but that's exactly why I will never claim that I'm the best artist out there, because I don't think I ever will be. But hey, practice makes perfect. Still practicing every day, we will get somewhere at least. The colors were quite simple, and we went with a dark brown for his bottom part and used a light green for the upper part of his body. The segment line in between these layers got a soccer field color, or that's just how I see it, and I even gave it that blocky mode shading. I did also bring in a yellow color for his mouth and played around with it for his eyes as well, but I wanted the yellow color to portray his electric attacking power, so I decided to just make his eyes brown to match his earthy belly side. Volthedge, the hedge Pokemon. This Pokemon lies partially on the ground, with the top of its body exposed to disguise as a hedge. Anything that touches its back will get a shock of electricity. Volthedge can coil itself up and lock its jaws on the end of its tail to make a circuit of electricity with the energy it has stored in its body. This allows him to create a force field around itself. It also has a unique ability called Volt Up. This makes it so the Pokemon takes no damage when hit by electric type moves. Instead, its attack stat is boosted by 1 stage. I wouldn't say that this is the best work I have ever done, but the concept of it is actually quite cool. Next time I hope my execution is just a little bit better too. Before we can get to the Pokemon of Misty, we have to give her a transformation as well, since this look can't pass as a fire type enthusiast. We once again looked at the already existing fire type gym leaders, and we could instantly tell a few details who came back in almost every one of them. They usually have an energetic spirit and some pointy or wild looking hair. This was then the first thing we actually changed on Misty too. We made her hair look a lot crazier, and we made sure it resembled some flames. We then got the idea of extending the coat she had into a long cape. This turned out to be an incredible direction for this piece, since we were able to add a scorch effect to the bottom of it, furthering the fiery concept. Although I know a lot of you dudes would love to keep the bathing suit in the design, I am not adding to that urge and decided to cover her legs with some sporty shorts. We also brought back the scorchy detail to the bottom of those. Last but not least, we added a fire pattern to each of her sleeves, which meant it was time to fill it with color. This is definitely my favorite part of this challenge, probably together with the fact that I have a lot more freedom with these designs compared to the Paradox challenge we did. We started by giving her coat a bright red color and decided on an orange for the accent parts of her clothing. The hair got a slightly darker orange color because I wanted to make sure you could easily tell the difference between the two orange elements. We went for a black color for her bodysuit to put the emphasis on the fiery colors and to create a better contrast in general. The shading process was mostly me trying to replicate the same shaded elements from the original Misty, but with one extra detail, which was a scorchy texture to the inside of her cape. Well everyone, meet Crispy, the leader of the Cerulean City's fire gym. Her nickname is the Rising Phoenix, and next to her battle job, she is the best pyrotechnician in Kanto. She easily managed to pull this off together with a fiery Pokemon, and it's now time to face her and her Pokemon. Her first Pokemon is a fire version of Golduck. At the start of this drawing we thought we were going to use our regular sketching technique again, which of course was to build out the simple shapes of the Pokemon and then replicate it one-on-one. However, we did do that study, but we decided to not go for a one-on-one copy this time. I don't know what happened to me, but I suddenly was able to form basic shapes into a slightly different pose. I guess we are actually learning a lot from our new sketching technique. Once I noticed that we were going to do this, I tried thinking of a fun direction for the Pokemon itself. It didn't take me long to come up with a name for him and decided to name him Golduck. This gave me a clear idea of what the finished piece would look like, and we could slowly start to build out this concept. At first I figured that I wanted to give him some type of rocky pants, just like Scrafty. The next idea was to move that into fiery pants, but this would clutter up the design way too much, so we didn't go for that. In the end I did actually keep the rocky pants, but his stance would just be him standing proudly with his arms on his waist. For the legs I of course took huge inspiration from Colossal and tried my best to make the perspective and texture believable. For his head I decided to make his beak a bigger and more prominent feature, gave him some blocky eyebrows for more expression, and made sure his fur looked like rock as well. The last detail we added were some flames coming out of the rocky elements, almost as if his fiery spirit is just waiting to burst out of his body. For the colors I wanted to go for an entirely grayed out palette. This would function as a good contrast to the flames and really put the focus on them. Golduck, the blacksmith Pokemon. Golduck is loved by blacksmiths for their hard mouth that works as an anvil. Their legs also contain a reliable fuel source. However, they aren't actually made out of coal, but rather an overcoat that can be rebuilt. It is unclear why they do this, but one possible reason is that they love the feeling of having a warm bottom. I genuinely think that we are getting a lot better at drawing our own Pokemon. I will say that I still have a lot to learn about actually rendering in the official Pokemon style, but we will eventually get there. The second Pokemon on Crispy's team is a fiery Quagsire. The first thing that came to mind with this design was a happy and energetic version of Quagsire, and I made sure the pose would look just like that. His feet were placed a bit further away from each other, and I made his body curve a bit more than his original form. I also made his arm swoop as if he was dancing. After simply bringing his tail onto it, we got a suggestion for a good reference animal, the fire salamander. This gave me the idea to add similar markings to a lot of areas of his body, and since we already decided on his fire electric typing, we gave him a lightning bolt like marking to the middle part. Although I did like the markings we gave him, the design felt a bit too flat in this way. This is why we added some depth to each of them by extending them to the outside of his body. This instantly made the piece look a lot better, and it helped me realize what this Pokemon would be. a dancer who would slam his tail onto the ground to create a beat for him to dance to, and he would generate energy by slapping on his markings. Now that the entire idea of the Pokemon was ready, I only had one thing left to do, which was to add in the colors. We did however do something new for this piece, and we made sure to place his tail on a separate layer to be able to properly animate his arms. This made it so we had 2 layers for his colors and shading, but for this piece it wasn't too much more of an issue, to be honest. For the colors themselves, we decided on a red color for his body and an orange color for his markings. We did eventually decide to go with a slightly darker body color to make the body markings shine more. We did this because the shiny colors look so freaking good with the contrast we gave it. Quackfire, the fiery dance Pokemon. Quackfire is a jolly fellow that loves to dance. They are attracted by music and usually don't need an invitation to attend a festival, where they just show up on their own accord. Quackfire slaps its tail on the ground repeatedly to work up a beat and it dances to it. This is their way of generating electricity in what many people consider its signature dance, the bonk. I never really hated or disliked Quagsire, but never acknowledged it either. However, now that I've drawn a variant of it myself, I can see how funny and great this character actually is. The shiny of it is an absolute banger as well, because we simply followed the colors of real fire salamanders. For the third Pokemon of Crispy's team, we're taking a look at a fire version of Lapras. I will admit that I went all over the place with the direction of this piece. At first my goal was to transform him into a fire flying type, but I wanted to use my own pose again, and I just wasn't able to make the flying elements work. I guess wings are just as hard, if not harder to draw than hands, and not a single iteration worked. I eventually just went into a more serpentine look with teeny tiny feet to suggest his power lays elsewhere. And elsewhere it did. I gave him big beefy arms to really make it look like he packs a punch. I also decided to not bring back the shell on the design, which may have resulted in a Pokemon looking a bit too empty, but this did free up the design to feel a lot faster and attacking oriented. The next thing we thought about a lot was to add a few extra design elements, but I just kept looking at Lapras itself and decided it would look closer to a Lapras by using a more simple design. My chat also kept saying it wouldn't look enough like a fire type, but I told them that would change once we added in the colors. Luckily I was right about this, and suddenly the entire design came together. The simple orange with the red accent color plus the sand color on his belly worked out perfectly. After all of this, it still looked a little bit too flat, but nothing a bit of shading can't fix, and I think this might be the coolest transformation I've ever made. Evaporus, the lava swimming Pokemon. This Pokemon dwells in the heart of volcanoes, only leaving to eat or mate. Even if the volcano erupts, Evaporus will choose to stay submerged in the lava. They are very docile creatures who prefer to live alone, though they will not hold back from showing their true strength if necessary. With their large claws they can rip into even the toughest of flesh. Like I said, I am extremely happy with this piece. It is so much more different than Lapras is, but still uses enough similar elements to actually still resemble it. For the final Pokemon of our team, we're taking a look at the fire type Starmie. The direction for this piece was decided way before even starting with the drawing. One of my viewers came up with the concept of basing it off of a literal star. This gave me the idea to combine it together with a black hole. The drawing itself would require a lot less cartoony drawing style, but in hindsight, I don't know if this actually made the piece look better. We started by mapping out his features, like a simple circle for his eye and 2 separate stars on top of each other. Once we were happy with the looks of that, we started to play around with his colors. We tried a bunch of different combinations, but eventually settled on a yellow and orange palette. The next step was to bring some shading into the piece, and we mostly focused on lighting certain areas up, and we of course added a glow to a lot of parts of his body. In the end, I guess I just wasn't able to bring my vision for it to the canvas canvas and it doesn't really look like a Pokemon anymore. This might be fixable with bringing it a bit closer to a cartoony style, but I don't know. The concept of it is cool at least. Starvoid, the stargazing Pokemon. Starvoid has been believed to have emerged directly from the underworld, a minion sent by its master to fly over the world and gather information. Looking at Starvoid's body will cause full blindness if not wearing proper eye protection. However, looking directly into its single black eye will cause instant death. It also has a unique ability called All-Seeing Eye. This ability makes it so the attacks of this Pokemon have a higher chance to land critical hits and have their accuracy increased by 10%. Yeah, this piece is kinda mwah. I will do my best to not make the same mistakes I made on this piece for our next video. At least I tried something new, and I know that I'm just not at that level yet. I created a brush set with all my favorite brushes. I use each of them with every drawing that I make, so if you want to draw in the same style as me, I recommend checking out my website. For only €5.99, you can get the Procreate brush set, which you will be able to use in Procreate. It includes an amazing line art brush, a highlight brush which instantly makes your pieces look a lot better, and many other fantastic brushes. I also want to have a written down version of how to create Paradox Pokemon. That's why I created this step-by-step guide. It's easy to follow, and I added a bunch more tips you can use while drawing. You will also get the work files of the 2 Paradox Pokemon we created, and I added 2 work files with just a line art so you can practice coloring and shading. This guide is also available for €5.99 on my website, but since I thought you guys might be interested in buying it together with the brush set, I made it into a combi deal for only €8.99 for the both of them. That is a 25% discount, so I know what I would do. As usual, we first have to stop by the design of Lieutenant Surge himself. The suggestion for the typing of this gym leader instantly sparked a lot of joy in me. I feel like Fairy is the complete opposite of what Surge usually portrays. A tough army dude into a yesified version of himself. Our goal for this piece was to make him look as feminine as we could, but still keeping him looking like a man. We started out by adding some fluff at the sleeves of his tank top, and followed that up by probably the most cursed thing I've ever drawn, turning his tank top into an actual crop top. For our next change, we felt that his glasses were too cool looking, so we added a flowery pattern to the bottom of it. We then had to make some changes to his necklace pendant, but I wasn't really sure what to do with it until someone in my chat suggested to make it into a love disc. This was an incredible idea and really upped the look of the entire piece. After this, we began speculating why he would look like this, and we figured that this would be the look of Surge if the Pokemon War never happened. This sparked the idea on me to change his belt buckle into a peace sign too. Of course, we couldn't let him have his short and spiky hair, so we changed that into a more wild and wavy variant. His arms did still feel a bit too empty, this is why we added a golden bracelet to it. For the final change, we focused on the facial area, where we added in a mustache plus a goatee. We also gave him 2 different styled earrings, just to give him a bit more sass. As always for this challenge, the colors were an absolute blast to play around with. Our main focus was to add a lot of pink into the color palette, and boy can I say that worked out perfectly. I know the design might look a bit cursed, but you have to agree that it also looks extremely good. I could genuinely see this character be part of a fairy type gym and as a fairy type Lieutenant Surge. Well everyone, meet Lieutenant Love, the leader of the Vermilion City's fairy gym. After one of his Pokemon got hospitalized in a meaningless training session, the lieutenant realized that violence is never the answer. He swore to never harm another soul, becoming a pacifist. He is even reluctant to engage in battle, but the only reason why he kept this job as a gym leader was his skill and knowledge of battling. Alright, it is now time to face him and his Pokemon. The first Pokemon of his team is of course a fairy type, the Raichu. We started out by studying the shapes of the original Pokemon and found out out that you can easily replicate his body by using 3 simple circles. Now that we knew that, we could start replicating it ourselves. My viewers voted on which typing they wanted to see for this piece, which was a fairy fighting type. This gave me the idea of making his tail into a big hand that would be able to support the weight of the entire Pokemon. The only way I would be able to do so was by creating my own pose. We played around with a few different ideas at first, but eventually settled on a cutely sitting creature on top of a steady and strong tail. I did also play around with some bigger arms to give him other ways of fighting as well, but this didn't look the way I wanted to, and that moved the design more towards a part ground typing. We then just scrapped it and brought back the stubby arms regular Raichu has. At that point we faced our next big struggle point, which was to find the direction we wanted to go for his ears. Like, what type of ears does a fighting type have, or a fairy one at that? After a few iterations we went with bunny ears, which looked cute for the fairy typing, but I made sure to draw them in a way where they would also look sturdy, so it might have a function in fights as well. We then spent some time on developing his facial area. I didn't really know if I wanted to keep the big cheek features, or even if I wanted to change up the features entirely. We eventually settled on the same type of eyes, but now with some cute looking eyebrows on there. We also added a flowery pattern around the eyes to play a bit more into the fairy typing. We then tried a few different shapes for his mouth and picked the one where he would have both the uncertainty look and the braveness one. For the colors I immediately imagined an Eastern bunny palette and went with a white color for his body with 3 different shades of pink for the accent parts. We did however bring one more color into the mix, which was a nice light blue for his eyes. Kawaichu, the tail slam Pokemon. Kawaichu is quick to throw out attacks with its ears, paws, feet and tail all capable of dealing serious damage. Areas on Kawaichu that are lighter in color are the softest parts of its body and the opposite for the darker areas. This results in the belly being the perfect pillow. It also has a unique ability called Love Tap, which makes all of the moves of this Pokemon that make contact have a 30% chance to leave the opponent infatuated. I believe that this is literally the best Fakemon I have ever made. The pose is unique, the concept is fun and interesting, plus the typing works really well with the design too. It is crazy how much better at art I'm getting lately. For the second Pokemon of his team, we're taking a look at a fairy type Electrode. This was probably one of the easiest transformations I've done in a while. The reason for this is simply because the shape of Electrode is literally just a circle. I will admit that even though it was easy, it is still a ball, which makes it less interesting than some of my other drawings. Now for the drawing itself, someone in my chat gave me the idea to transform into an actual heal ball, and this worked out perfectly for the fairy typing. I did however go for a slightly different design than regular Electrode and decided to bring the slit of real Pokeballs into the design as a replacement for his mouth. Other than that, we didn't do much differently and just brought in the design elements of a heal ball, which are the 2 golden swoops. The colors were a one-on-one copy from a reference ball, and the only other thing that left some room for creativity was the shading part. We made sure to put every element on a separate layer and use a slightly visible metal texture on the golden swoops. Electrode, the healing orb Pokemon. This Pokemon will explode at random, releasing a gas that calms those around it. Scientists have been trying to use this gas to make a love potion. If you climb into a Electrode, the gas inside will heal injuries and wounds, but it's risky as taking in too much of the gas can have dangerous side effects. It feels strange that the design is just so basic, and I had to just accept that. I do however think that we did a good job on bringing him into the wanted typing, and yeah, the shiny does look like a golden snitch from Harry Potter, so I guess I'm happy with the overall end results. The third Pokemon of Lieutenant Love is a fairy type of Electrode. Wait, we just did that. Well, technically he has two different Electrodes on his team, so I decided that I wanted to make two different versions of them. For this one we wanted to go for a fairy dark typing, and so we got the idea to base this one off of luxury balls. The part fairy typing could work for this ball because the gold of it could function as his glamorous link to the typing. Although this drawing was based on the exact same Pokemon as the previous one, we did have one struggle point while working on this version. I mostly had a hard time getting all the ridges and texture lines to look right. Some attempts look bad from a perspective reason, and others because of the space between each line on a top element. In the end we did manage to make it work, and to make this ball resemble its reference better, we also gave him the Pokeball slit in the middle of his body. This did however make us place the facial features a bit further from one another. For the colors we used the exact same colors from a regular luxury ball, and we also spent some time texturing the metallic parts to make them look like really shiny metals. This really helped for the glamorous luxury look we were going for. Stylectrode, the arrogant Pokemon. Its newfound beauty has made it conceited and arrogant. While it still has the same healing gas in its body, Stylectrode will always refuse to share any of it. It is however a popular pick for Pokemon contests, where its natural style and grace make it a tough Pokemon to beat. Whenever two Stylectrodes meet, a battle of beauty is bound to break out. I know you guys might argue that it looks closer to a fire dark type than an actual fairy type, but I really like the luxury link to the typing, and I feel like fairy type designs that aren't just a cute friendly looking Pokemon are way more interesting in general. For the fourth Pokemon of Lieutenant Love's team is the fairy typed Magneton. The route for this design was clear from the start because I got an incredible suggestion from one of my viewers during one of the previous drawings. They came up with the concept of an angelic version of Magneton that could be a fairy psychic type. Once I read that message, I just knew exactly what I wanted to do. I started by drawing in 3 simple spheres for the 3 different heads he has. The next step was to draw up a wing variant for the replacement of 4 of the magnets. We did this by using one armor part and extending feathers out of that. We then placed another head with a small eye on it as a connection to the main body parts. For the people that haven't figured out what my reference was for this piece, I recommend looking up what biblical accurate angels look like. One of those ideas is basically a big winged creature with a lot of eyes scattered all around its body. It really looks quite disturbing, so that's definitely what I had in mind for our Magneton as well. For this pose we were able to use the same wings at the back parts of his body, like I said earlier, and we only had to draw one other variant which had to look a bit more scrunched up for the 2 magnets at the front parts. This already looked quite good, but we wanted to add one last detail to that mix. When you draw an angelic Pokemon, you can't forget to at least bring some holy energy onto the design. We did this by giving him a halo at the top of his head and by adding in 4 arm-like extensions to the middle and bottom part of his body. This only left us to work on the colors, but while I was adding in the white and golden colors, I got the idea to add in an iris to each of the eyes to make him feel even more uncanny. This was also a great accent color, and I believed it finished up the piece perfectly. Bibliton, the angelic Pokemon. It is said that Bibliton can only be seen if it chooses to be, plus that every human and Pokemon has one watching over them with its 9 eyes. Depending what your Bibliton sees in your life will determine what will happen to you in the afterlife. I am super happy with this design. It really fits both of the typings, and I think it fits Magneton really well in general. I also love the fact that this shiny looks like a devilish version of himself, which of course works well with the fallen angel lore that exists. It is now time for the ace of his team, a fairy type Electabuzz. We once again began doing a shape study, and we figured out that this body wouldn't be too hard to replicate, which led us to creating another unique pose. We started by drawing in a big circle for his head and a bigger circle for the bottom part of his body. body. When we connected these parts, it resulted in a big chunky body. This looked okay, but it wasn't the look I was actually going for. The thing about Electabuzz is that it is a cool design, but I'm just not a big fan of his chubby belly, and this is exactly why I decided to make this into a top heavy build, similar to a gorilla. It was quite fun to see that I've gotten better at building out the shapes, because we were now at least able to make something that looks remotely close to actual hands. Once we were happy with all the basic shapes and proportions, we moved on to adding in the details. We began by adding in his fingers and made sure to showcase proper elbows. The next step was to work on his feet, and we gave him some sharp toenails just like his regular form. At first the goal for this Pokemon was to become a fairy poison type, but during this entire process it started to look more and more like a part dragon type. This is when I just said screw it and went with that typing instead. Sometimes I want to really use a different typing for these pieces, but I think it's best to just follow the design in whichever way it wants to go. We shouldn't try to force a typing onto a design when it clearly looks like a different one, except for Stylectrode. Once we accepted his typing, we removed some of the details who made him look a bit closer to a primate, like the fur on his arms for example. After this we spent quite some time working on his jaw, because it just didn't look like every part was in the same perspective. This was the last thing we fixed until we could finally bring in some patterns all around his body, because yeah, the design looked way too flat without it. For the colors I firstly didn't want to use any pink on it, but when I tried it as the accent color next to the grey main color, I just couldn't move away from it anymore. It looked absolutely fire, and it really molded both typings together. Electabuzz, the Warden Pokemon. Though it has a large stature and intimidating face, Electabuzz has a pure heart who puts others before itself. It uses its draconic strength to fend off threats from those who can't protect themselves. Despite this, many still fear Electabuzz. This is due to the Pokemon's incredible physical strength, which makes him able to rip trees straight from the ground, and because its feet make the ground quake with each step. I am extremely proud of this piece. Not only did I make another completely new pose, we also moved quite far away from the original design of Electabuzz. I am for real progressing quite quickly now, and I can already tell you that that is only going to go faster during this year. Our first stop was of course the transformation of Erika herself. We began by adding some warm fluff to the color of her dress and decided that we wanted to change it into two separate pieces. A thicker coat for her top part and a more flowy dress for the bottom part. This instantly made it look like she was able to withstand way colder temperatures. I did play around with the idea of giving her some actual shoes instead of these slippers, but we figured out that it didn't look elegant enough, so we kept them the same. The next focus point was to give her a new haircut, and I genuinely think that this helped a lot to make her look comfy in the cold. We then played around with a beanie on her head, and it turned out pretty good after a little bit of tweaking. The last thing we added to the design were some snowflake patterns on the bottom of her dress. We did also try to replicate the other pattern Erika has in her regular design, but we couldn't get anything to look as cool as that was, so we just went with a snowy pattern to separate it into two different parts. For the colors I mostly used a blue palette with some yellow for the fluff, and we decided to give her a dream ball to add a nice accent color to the palette. We did also do the same thing for her eyes and used a nice orangey yellow for them. Although this color palette looked quite nice, it also made her look quite similar to a water type enthusiast. This is why I decided to change the pattern on her dress into a more sharp and pointy one, because it looked way too much like waves otherwise. I think the end result looks pretty cool, literally, and I genuinely love the comfy look the added curls brought into the design. Well everyone, meet Aunt Erika, the leader of the Celadon City's Ice Gym. It is said that this is a multiversal version of the grass type gym leader Erika, where she got lost on the cold mine around silver. The only way for her to survive was to fully embrace the harsh temperatures and by using a difficult meditation technique to keep herself warm. Well, time to face her and her Pokemon. Her first Pokemon is an icy version of Jumpluff. The first idea that I got was to change his fluffy orbs into ice cubes, but I wasn't sure if I wanted to do that literally or if I wanted to just turn them into ice. We eventually settled on a second concept. Now that I knew in which direction I wanted to take this piece, I started working on the pose. I figured it would be cute if this Pokemon uses his ice blocks as skates. This is why I positioned its body in a way where you can instantly see what it's capable of. The next thing we worked on was his body, where we took huge inspiration from Paros from League of Legends. We even brought in a tiny little mustache as a reference to a Brommified version of a Poro. I did also want to play around with some cute round markings on the bottom of his feet, but this genuinely made it look like he had nipples due to the placement of his feet. Luckily, this wasn't as visible once I added in the shading, but you can probably not unsee it anymore. For the colors, I decided to go hard into a Tundra palette, using a white color for his body and combining it with some dark blue elements for the connections to his icy hands. We did go for a black mustache to make it stand out more, and we used a light blue color in his eyes as well. The shading process mostly consisted of making the eyes look see-through, and I think we actually managed to do exactly that. Snowpuff, the ice skating Pokemon. These Pokemon are almost as light as helium. This makes them able to bounce off of all sorts of surfaces. The 3 balls of ice weigh just enough to keep it from floating away, and it uses them to skate around at high speeds. If it is too hot in Snowpuff's area, the ice balls will start to melt and Snowpuff will slowly float up towards the sky until it gets to a high enough altitude for the air to replenish his ice. I am super happy with this design. It would work incredibly well as a convergent Pokemon, and I really love the typing we gave him too. Her second Pokemon is a frozen version of Tangela. I knew that this drawing wasn't going to be anything too difficult. This was mainly because of the fact that the direction for the piece was quite clear in my head from the start. It even was one of the reasons why I wanted to go for an ice typing for Erika. My concept for this piece would be that instead of the vines covering its body, it would be a pile of snow. The execution for this was quite simple, because we only had to go around his body in a wavy pattern. This would emulate to be an easy representative of snow, but we did have to make sure we added a bit of depth into the design by making it go over its legs, for example. I did feel like its body would feel a bit too empty and boring, and that's why I decided to bring in a typical carrot in the middle of his face. For the colors, I combined a simple white for the snow with a dark grey color for his face and feet, and we of course went with the orange accent color to fill up his carrot-like nose and to actually play into the unique ice-fire typing. Snowmela, the snowball Pokemon. This Pokemon is made out of a type of snow that is hot, commonly shortened to Snot. This makes it so it cannot be melted. Snowmela is able to single-handedly turn a lake that has frozen over into a hot tub by jumping into the water. I really like the simplicity of this design. I think we did a good job on portraying the wanted concept, and that he doesn't look too flat either. For our third Pokemon, we're taking a look at an ice type Blossom. First up, I figured out which typing I wanted to use for this piece, which was the Ice Steel typing. I just really thought it would be a cool experiment to combine such hard feeling typings into the cute looking Blossom. We started out by drawing in her head shape and built a front leaning body under that. I wanted the pose to feel energetic and to show that she wants to jump straight into battle. We then changed her dress into a skirt, which would have some metal and ice blades sticking out of it. I also added some small circles to make it seem like the icy blades were bolted into place for the extra steel type feeling. It did take me a while to figure out what I wanted to do for the replacement of the flowers on her head, because I didn't want to make something that was too close to that, since flowers don't really fit our wanted typing. We eventually settled on some big icy horns, and I really liked how this made her look strong and fierce, while also still maintaining the cute look I was ultimately going for. for. The colors were quite simple, and we just used a few different shades of grey for most of her body parts, and we used the light blue as the accent color for all of the iced out elements. The shading was once again used to make it look like there was some actual depth in these icy parts. Belladise, the Cold Blade Pokemon. This Pokemon has mastered the art of blade dancing. It can easily weave its way out of any battle, while happily taking down its enemies. It is however known to be extremely kind, but hugging one is not recommended. This design is a good combination of both of the typings, and although it looks quite different from Bellossom, I do still think you can tell what the original reference was, especially when you look at the shiny. For her ace, we're taking a look at her ice type Victory Bell. At first I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do with this piece, even though I thought the design did have a lot of potential with how cool Victory Bell looks. After some brainstorm sessions, we came up with the concept that you can either completely love or you will really hate it. I don't think there's any in between there. I thought it would be cool to transform his body quite a bit to make it look like one of those Easter Island statues. I know it might be a bit far-fetched from the original design of Victory Bell, but I think his body shape worked pretty well for it, and it was fun to mess around with the available elements. However, you might be wondering what on earth this has to do with the ice typing, and that was exactly what I was wondering myself too. I then got the idea to add 2 icy spikes on the bottom of his body, which could function as his legs, or at least something to keep him from falling over all the time. The other thing that we changed was to give him some ice shooting out of the top of his head. This would make it look like this Pokemon is bursting off of ice powers, and to amplify this even further, we also made the features in his mouth into icy ones too. The final design elements we brought onto it were some blue sparkles to go into a more magical approach. I really think that this tiny detail made it look a lot more like a Pokemon instead of just a living statue. The colors for it were mostly a mix of different shades of dark gray and a combination of light blue plus an even lighter blue for his icy parts. Freeze Turn, the Icy Head Pokemon. These mysterious creatures have been found on an island that had just appeared out of nowhere. They seem to hold a huge portion of magic power in their bodies, but seem to only be interested in chewing gum. Scientists have no idea why they like it so much, but they constantly remind us by saying "Dum Dum, have you gum gum?" Love or hate this thing, but I think it looks like an interesting Pokemon. I genuinely think it could really add some mystery into a Pokemon game, similar to the never-ending mystery of Unknown, for example. Well everyone, these were the first 4 Kanto gym leaders as a different typing. Next week we'll be doing a different challenge, and we will be adding a new starter to each of the regions, starting with of course the first 4. Well, let me know which design was your favorite today, and goodbye!